If you're in menopause or perimenopause and you've noticed changes in your body that don't really make sense, changes you've probably been told were just part of this stage of life, then you may relate to this video. I want to talk to you about specific things that changed for me, not to give advice, but so you can see if any of this mirrors your own experience. And as I share them, I want you to listen to patterns in your own body, because the key takeaway isn't just do what I did. It's about understanding signals you may have just brushed off or ignored. In my last video, I shared why I started changing how I eat during menopause. And yes, weight was part of that story. But the weight wasn't what surprised me the most. It was realizing a lot of what I blamed on just menopause started to change once my days became steadier. None of this came from eating less. It came from steadier energy, fewer spikes and crashes, and feeling more supported by food instead of fighting it. Before I go further, I want to give you a little context, because this wasn't about following a new diet or cutting calories. The real shift was that I stopped focusing on weight and started paying attention to how food affected my blood sugar and energy and how I felt in my body afterward. I didn't set out to fix my sleep or joints or digestion. I was just trying to feel steadier. Everything I'm about to share flowed from that. And what surprised me most was how many things improved once my days felt steadier, without me giving up the foods or the moments I enjoy. And the first place I noticed that shift was in my sleep patterns. Sleep was probably the most frustrating part of menopause for me. I've always been an early to bed, early to rise person. 5 a.m. has been my normal for years. But during menopause, I started waking up at around 3 a.m. like clockwork, wide awake and mind racing. And on top of that, I was dealing with really uncomfortable night sweats and hot flashes. Not every night, but often enough that I never felt totally settled. I remember thinking, this is just how it is now. I wasn't sick or unusually stressed. I was doing all the right things, and yet I never felt truly rested. But once I changed how I was eating, everything else started to change. I wouldn't say the night sweats disappeared completely, because they didn't, but they became far less intense and much more manageable. And those 3 a.m. wake-ups stopped being my normal. My sleep started finally feeling restorative again. And if you've ever dealt with disrupted sleep in menopause, you know how much that changes everything. What mattered most to me was that this didn't feel hard. I wasn't forcing anything, and I wasn't hungry or deprived. I actually felt more satisfied during the day than I had in years, and that made everything else so much easier. The next change took me a while to recognize, and once I did, it was incredibly freeing. So here's the scenario. You meet friends at your favorite restaurant for lunch. You'll have appetizers and a big entree, maybe dessert, maybe even a glass of wine or two. And before you even go, you already know what's coming later. When you get home, you'll have to carve out time for a nap because you'll barely be able to keep your eyes open. I used to think that was just the price of enjoying myself. But once I changed how I was eating as a lifestyle, that stopped happening. And I can still enjoy those moments occasionally without restriction and without feeling completely wiped out afterward. That was a huge wake-up call for me. I realized how much I accepted feeling awful as the cost of having a good time, and how unnecessary that actually was. What I didn't realize at the time was that this wasn't just showing up in my energy. I also had joint pain in my hip and my right hand that I had completely blamed on aging. It wasn't dramatic, just constant little reminders. I wasn't injured and I wasn't over-exercising. The pain was just there. I started seeing a physical therapist, and that helped, but only temporarily. The pain always came back. And I think that's how a lot of things show up in midlife. Not loud enough to panic, but persistent enough to notice, right? And once I changed how I was eating, the pain slowly dissipated, and then it was gone. That was the first time I realized how much inflammation I had been living with without ever questioning it. My body had been communicating, but I didn't recognize the signals. And then there was my hair. Wow, what another surprise. I've always had thick hair, so I didn't realize that it was thinning. But a few months after changing how I eat, I started seeing all these baby hairs when I blow dried, like all over my head. I remember thinking, wait, when did this happen? I even asked my hairstylist about it because I wanted to make sure it was all new growth and not breakage. And she confirmed that it was, in fact, all new hair. And that's when it struck me. I hadn't noticed the thinning. I had just adapted to it. And I only noticed when it started growing back. It felt like a quiet confirmation that these changes were affecting my entire body. I also noticed changes in my skin. Suddenly I had skin tags and some darkening under my arms. Things I assumed were just another part of getting older. I remember my grandmother had skin tags, so I thought it must be genetic. I wasn't trying to fix it, I had accepted it, even though it definitely made me uncomfortable. At some point I learned that these kinds of skin changes can be due to blood sugar patterns. And then quietly, without me targeting them directly, the skin tags and darkening disappeared. And that was another moment when I realized how much our bodies communicate if we know how to listen. And my gut was another big one for me. Early in menopause, before I changed how I eat now, I spent a weekend in New York City with my daughter, sister, and nieces. We walked everywhere, we went to shows, and we ate all the food. And instead of feeling tired in a good way, I just felt heavy, so bloated and uncomfortable. I remember thinking, why do I feel like this so often? But again, I didn't question it. And once I changed how I eat, that constant bloated, weighed down feeling went away. My digestion feels so much easier now, and that's not something I ever take for granted. That was yet another place my body had been communicating, and I didn't recognize it for what it was. What's interesting is that I didn't go looking for these changes. I didn't set out to fix my sleep or my joints or my digestion. I noticed them because they were gone. And that's when I realized something fundamental had shifted. If you're wondering what I actually changed, I didn't go on a diet and I didn't start eating less. I started paying attention to how different foods made me feel, especially when it came to my blood sugar, energy, and inflammation. The goal wasn't restriction, it was steadiness. And once I understood how my body was actually responding to food, not what I had believed it should do, everything started to make sense. What this taught me is that my body wasn't failing me. It was trying to tell me something. And if you're in midlife and feeling confused about changes you've been told to just accept, you're not imagining it. That's what I want to explore here. Understanding our bodies now without extremes and without blaming ourselves. In future videos, I'm going to be testing foods on myself and sharing the results. Not because everyone will respond the same way, but because it can give us a starting point for thinking differently about our own food choices. If there's a food you've always wondered about, leave it in the comments. And if you want to understand what actually changed for me and why I started testing foods on myself in the first place, I'll link that video right here.